Hi, and welcome to the show. Well, today we're going to talk about something the world needs more of. That doesn't narrow it down very much, but when you hear the topic, I think you're going to say I'm right. And I've got some people here who are experts in compassion. Now, they have a whole world around that word that they've built and are bringing a lot of people to it. So I invited them here to be on the show today so that you could learn along with me. So I want to say thank you and welcome to Sara, Owens, Woodard, and Otis Woodard.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah.
Well, I've introduced this topic of compassion. It's huge. Just in our conversation to get started, it really touched me about self-compassion. We're going to talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
And you've done some great thinking of bringing a lot of people to it. And I just think the people are in for a real treat today. Well, let's get to know you a little bit. How did you come to this work?
Well, I'm a psychologist by training, Ken, so I spent the first 20 years as a psychologist working with young kids and families, often kids that were living in very difficult and challenging circumstances, having serious medical issues or histories of trauma or neglect. And I did that work for about 20 years, and as you can imagine, compassion was a huge part of that work, trying to help parents cultivate compassion that was extended more from their natural compassion, and where they were able to really become the therapeutic agents for their kids. So that's really where I started to study compassion and work with it with families. Yeah.
And Otis, how about
Yeah,
you?
mine wasn't so pretty as that. Back in 2002, I was kind of a corporate high flyer. I was a general manager in a Fortune 100 company, and I made some really bad personal decisions and kind of blew up my life, if you will. And so that was kind of a low water mark for me. And I really got into really personal development, leadership development as a result of that, really figuring out how to move forward in my own life and make some changes that I very, very much needed to make. And having some self-compassion in that process was a huge aid to me. And unfortunately, it's like the last part of the equation that came into to focus for me. But it's now sharing that with others, sharing a process of change and compassion and self-compassion is really just an incredible experience.
So a big change. I wonder if it was a small part of your life that needed a lot of change or a lot of your life that needed a little change. Let's back up to what you were like in high school.
Yeah.
Can you see the through lines of who you still are and how you changed from there now?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, what I was crazy about in high school was actually photography, tennis, and track. And the other thing I was very active doing is by the age of 15, I had built my first 14-foot sailboat, a sloop. And so I was, very artistic and kind of a craftsman. I know you build a lot yourself. You're very good with the tools. And so to me, a lot of what I've always been working on is systems and bringing things together. And sometimes you have to break things apart to bring a new system forward. And that's kind of what it was for me. And to me, photography is really about perspective. And I think that's the part that kind of got me into trouble was not anything to do with photography, but I lost perspective. I started not seeing the world straightforwardly. And that was something that came, I think, through as very challenging times when I was young with my parents' situation and their marriage and some challenges there. And so my perception I wasn't seeing the world straightforwardly. And the more power I got as I moved along in my career, the more distorted that became. And, so I think that's very common with leaders is the more influence you gain, the more trouble you can get yourself into. And so finally that caught up with me. Yeah.
Wow, so you come to this not necessarily from reading a few other books and putting some things together, some thoughts. This has really come from deep inside of your personal experience.
Mine was more like an act of survival, that really to really be able to move forward in life, I had to come up with a different way. And that's a strong change motivator. It's, as a human being, hard to change unless the stakes are quite high. There's a saying that most people prefer the certainty of misery than the misery of uncertainty. And, going through a change process is uncertain.
All right, well, this is going to be a form of great discussion here, I'm sure, but I don't want to miss you, Sarah. On high school, what brought you to this place from your youth?
Well, this might be a different high school story than my friends from high school would tell, Ken.
Well, we mostly do that, don't we?
Well, when I was a junior, I think I was just finishing my junior year, I got diagnosed with cancer in high school.
Oh,
So that would really shifted my perspective and I noticed that doctors couldn't really talk to me very directly or clearly about the situation. And I actually committed during that time that I wanted to help doctors learn how to talk to their patients in a more helpful, compassionate way. So that was kind of my start. So there you have it.
well, I am just impressed to be in the presence of people that have brought such life experience to this. Well, let's
Yeah.
get to it. Let's not run out of time before we get to
Good.
the heart of what you've developed.
Sure.
Right now, you and I live not far from each other, just about
Right. Just over the ridge.
Over the ridge out in Yamhill. But you've built something special out there, and maybe you've brought a slide. Maybe we can pull that up, Caroline, of your Garden Center for Peace and Cooperation.
Yeah.
That is a beautiful building.
Yeah. Talk about that.
Yeah,
a little
we
bit.
built this beautiful building on our property out in Yamhill. It's dedicated to my parents, Wayne and Marlene Owens, who lived lives committed to serving others. And really, the purpose of the building is to bring together people in the community to creatively come together and cooperate to contribute to the greater good. So it's a place for small group meetings, really. And we have a beautiful view. It's a very uplifting, naturally built building. And most recently, we had in December a big compassion gathering. We had virtual people coming in virtually to join us and people there with us. And we did a compassion and self-compassion practices for 4 hours together and had discussion and sharing. So it's an awesome building.
Yeah.
Strong intention there. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, you've brought with you some of your, can I call it a technology? That's probably not the right word.
Yeah. Well, it's
A
really
model.
yeah, it's a
A
model.
model.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you brought a slide. We can bring that up, Caroline. You could talk us through these 4 aspects of compassion.
Yeah, it really is our approach to working with people. And you want to talk just for a second about first of all, the need for compassion, which is the first
Sure.
aspect of this.
Sure. So we do have a definition of compassion that lists 4 aspects of compassion. I think it's helpful to do that because the compassion is slide there. It's so helpful because people are often confused about what compassion is. They confuse it with empathy. So compassion for us has 4 aspects. The first is to recognize suffering in other people or ourself. The second is to feel or imagine what it would be like for that person in the situation. The third aspect is to be able to get in touch with your desire to alleviate the suffering. And the fourth aspect of compassion is to take action to alleviate that suffering. So 4 aspects of compassion. It might not be what you thought of in the first place, and so it's helpful to define it. So for my work in compassion right now, a good deal of it is teaching compassion cultivation training, which is an 8-week course. I'm teaching it currently at Linfield, and we have 24 participants. Otis is in the class and is a support there. There's 24 local people involved, and we spend 8 weeks, 2 hours a week on Tuesday nights, learning about practical ways to expand our natural compassion and to grow our self-compassion, which often we don't have much of. So that's a big aspect of the compassion development that I'm doing right now.
Yeah, and so where does compassion figure in? This model, this 4-part model that we're talking about is a model for change. And it can be used to change at an individual level, or say if you own a business at a team level, or an even broader level, like at a community type of level. And so, some people say, well, why would compassion come first? Well, any change initiative is going to provoke some form of resistance. It will provoke fear, for example. And so if you want to change the world, the first thing you have to do, whether your world is you or your family or a team or a broader community, is everybody needs to feel safe. And compassion is a wonderful tool to make ourselves feel safe, so we can be a secure base unto ourselves, but also to increase the feeling of security of the people around us. And so we found it's just a profound capacity to develop. And most people have a lot of misguided notions about what compassion is. Like, I work a lot with leaders, and leaders think, well, if I develop compassion, I'm going to go soft. People are going to be able to run all over me or whatnot. So there's a huge amount of distortion around what compassion is. And so this, if we can give it and receive more compassion, then it sets the stage for being able to do what we need to do in terms of change. I don't know if that makes sense. Is that, you want to say anything about that,
Yeah,
Sara?
go ahead, Ken.
Well, there's self-compassion and there's compassion for others. Is there a starting point, one or the other? Where do you begin?
That's a great question. Often we begin with compassion because it's easier for people. So if people start to develop compassion, let's say for your loved ones, people you naturally have compassion for, we take that and we amplify that, amplify the compassion you already have for the people you love. And that's a good starting point then to saying, okay, in the developing self-compassion, you want to bring the same qualities you bring to caring for others to yourself. So one definition of self-compassion would be that it's bringing care, concern, and warmth to yourself when you're experiencing stress or suffering in some way.
What kind of reactions do you run into from people when you start to do that? Oh, yes, I'm feeling so much more compassionate about my friends, my family, and I see what I can do for them, and I have so much understanding there. And you say, yeah, now do it to yourself. That's a whole nother ballgame. To me, it all of a sudden became kind of like, I'm afraid to do this.
Yeah. There is actually a scale called the fear of self-compassion scale, Ken, and you're not alone in feeling that way. People are scared if they bring compassion to themselves. For example, they'll be flooded with grief or they'll be overwhelmed with emotions. And so we tread lightly and we let people self-regulate. We don't say, now bring self-compassion to yourself. We talk about what are the barriers, what are the fears, what stops you from bringing it to yourself, and what would be the benefit to start to extending compassion to yourself.
Well, here's the inconvenient truth.
Uh-oh.
The inconvenient truth, here's the is that many of us like to think of ourselves as being really compassionate, but we have the same reaction you were just talking about, where self-compassion, no, I don't have so much of that, I'm really hard on myself. Well, we can maybe express more compassion than we have self-compassion, but there's a limit to that. In other words, to move to the fullest expression of compassion, that's not possible without developing self-compassion. And so the inconvenient truth is that many people will see themselves as really compassionate towards others, but very hard on themselves. And that's an illusion that we can really, truly exercise unconditional compassion and not cultivate the same thing for ourselves.
Yeah, and you can think of it as the more full your heart is inside of you, the more you can give away. So filling yourself up, and you can use that analogy from the airplane, put the oxygen on yourself first so that you can help others. Because if you pass out, you're not going to be that helpful to others. And that's the same with self-compassion. So we don't ask people to be equal, like Otis said. The two are related, and so we challenge people, and it turns out a lot of people recognize pretty quickly that it's going to build a strength and a resilience actually internally to give themselves self-compassion.
So that's why we start with compassion. Hopefully that makes sense, that if we're going to change, whether it's ourselves or our family or relationship or team or whatever, we need to feel safe, and the people around us need to feel safe. Well, that kind of brings us to the second part of the model, which is we need to work skillfully with our emotions. And why is that? There's a really tight connection between compassion and our ability to work with our emotions. Because, for example, if I'm not good at working with my emotions, I'll show you all kinds of compassion when you're pleasing me and I like you. But the moment you start to trigger my emotion, then I'm going to close my heart to you. And so a huge part of learning to actually, to be unconditional love, to express unconditional love, which would be another way I would call that a shade of compassion, if you will, is I can't shut my heart when you upset me and then reopen it when I like you again, because that's not going to give you or anyone else around me a sense of security. You're going to be walking on pins and needles because you're only going to receive warmth and support from me if I'm in the mood to give it to you. So now I'm in conditional love, conditional compassion, and that doesn't set the environment for safety.
That sounds like a huge quadrant there of dealing with your emotions and not letting them affect your ability to be compassionate.
Yeah.
What are some of the first emotions that you run into, and how do you address that? Give me a place to start right now. Here I am, and this person over here has touched something inside of me. Maybe it's my self-worth.
Sure.
And so suddenly I'm like this. How are you going to help me deal with that emotions in your?
Ken, that's a great question. I would say this, that it's a process. It's not like count to 10 is going to work. So the process we do is, we teach people how do emotions work biologically in your body, in your brain. Understand your nervous system. Understand what happens to your brain and nervous system if you feel someone challenges your self-worth, for example. And you've got to be able to calm your body under distress. And actually, one of the things that helps calm your body under distress is a very simple self-compassion technique. Will you do it?
Yeah,
Show
it's
Ken.
you
It's a
literally
statement.
you literally can do this in the moment. So if I do something and it triggers you, and you want to downregulate yourself, then you can just in your mind say 4 simple statements. This moment is hard for me right now. That's the first acknowledgement, right? That I'm triggered, I'm worked up. This is hard for me, or this is a moment of suffering for me, because that's what's happening inside. So you're acknowledging that. Then the second thing is to say, this is human. To suffer is human. And then the third thing is, may I be kind to myself in this moment. And then the fourth thing is, may I give myself the compassion I need. So you and I can be in that exchange, and if you can remember those 4 statements, then as we're having this interaction, you're taking a part of your awareness to say these 4 things to yourself, and what you're going to find is that's going to put your parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system in balance. You're going to start down-regulating yourself so you can be more at choice of how to respond to me. And if you weren't doing that, then it more likely that you're going to react to me. And that's where we do the things that we later regret.
This is hard for me. I'm suffering. This is human. This happens.
Yeah.
This is human. This
Yeah.
is part
You're
of the
not
human
bad.
condition.
You're,
Okay,
you're
not
just
bad.
human.
Yeah.
You're human.
And the third one was?
May I be kind to myself in this moment.
It's
in
an
this
intention.
very moment. Yeah.
Even if you don't believe you can do it,
Yeah.
you work with it.
What would be some of those barriers to not being kind to yourself? What would that look like if you're? What would being kind to yourself look like? Tell me about that.
Well, one way it could look like, Ken, is noticing what you do when you're mean to yourself. So if someone challenges you and inside your mind, like many of us, you start to say, yeah, I was pretty bad then. That was a big mistake I made. I really screwed up. I'm kind of a bad person. So if you notice this cascading negative self-criticism, or if you have a perfectionism, which is considered really toxic, actually, to our brain and nervous system, then you begin to notice these things. And then, so may I be kind means when I hear those mean voices, I don't believe them. I say, that's a mean voice I have. And one of these meditation teachers that's so lovely, Sharon Salzberg, calls her mean voice Lucy, from the Peanuts, Lucy,
that's
who's
Lucy
always
talking.
torturing Charlie.
Yeah.
Who's always saying, Charlie, you're a mess up, you couldn't be worse. So she says, there's Lucy talking. So she brings playfulness. So may I be kind is recognizing in all the ways we're not kind to ourselves. Maybe we then, go drink too much, or we go attack the dog, or, yell at someone else, whatever we do. So it's noticing that and starting to bring some gentleness and some space around
For me,
the
it's
times when we're not kind.
Yeah, for me, Ken, it's really simple. The example you gave is perfect where, I have a sense that what's getting triggered in me is because of some self-doubt or some shame. So what does kindness look like? Kindness in that moment looks to me like comforting myself. Saying, hey, Otis, this is
Absolutely.
going on for you. Just be like a good friend or a loved one would do for you. If they knew that you were triggered, they'd say, hey, Ken, it's okay, take a breath. It's just something going on in the background that's making you feel really jacked up, because you're feeling guilt or shame or a lack of self-worth. And so to me, when I'm saying that, the kindness to me is actually having a feeling towards myself of caring in that moment, that I'm caring for myself in the moment. And it's a skill that anybody can develop. It sounds so weird to be in an interaction,
Right.
but a part of your awareness is actually tending to you and comforting you and bringing you back down where you don't end up doing the things that you wish you didn't do later.
And the fourth step of the four.
Yeah, and the fourth step is, may I give myself the compassion I need.
Okay. All right.
So in those statements, I hope what's being conveyed is you're actually evoking a feeling towards yourself.
A feeling toward yourself.
You're evoking a feeling towards yourself of caring in the moment. And that brings that
Calms your
yeah,
nervous system.
yeah, it's what Sara calls as a psychologist. You're learning to become a secure base unto yourself. Yeah, so all of us, when this is something I learned from Sara, when in our early childhood, very early, often when pre-verbal, we end up somewhere on a secure or insecure scale based on how we formed our attachment to our primary caregiver, mom and or dad, or someone else, whoever was giving that care. And if I lean toward the insecure side of that spectrum, which I am, if I'm having this reaction with you as you're triggering my self-doubt, my shame, and everything else, when I do this practice, I'm inching myself from insecure toward secure, and I'm becoming a secure base unto myself.
So we've talked about the first two quadrants,
Yeah.
and we have about 7 minutes left.
Yeah.
We're not going to cover the whole
Yeah,
world here,
no
but
problem.
the change model, figuring out what you're going to do to change
Yeah.
this suffering, this or right that you're
Yeah,
seeing,
yeah.
and then the fourth step, putting it into action. So let's talk about that change.
Change
Yeah.
model.
Yeah, so the first two, the compassion and learning to work with emotions, those set the stage for now really being able to do the work. And as Sara talks about them, those are really capacity building. I'm building the capacity and the resilience, the ability to change. You get down to the third component, which is actually having a strategy for change. Most people don't have a clue as to what's giving rise to the behaviors they wish they could change. They don't understand the source of it. They don't, as in
Behaviors
Sarah's,
of yourself or of others.
yeah, it cuts both ways. And it's like, we want a different result. We know we need to change our behavior in some way to have it, but then we go blank. We don't know what's underneath the hood in there. And Sara, in the emotions course that she wrote, talks about that being like an internal operating system. So we have this swirl of instinctual drives and emotions and thoughts that are like an internal operating system running on our neural wetware, giving rise to these behaviors we wish we could change. So what do? We use things like affirmations and things like that, and they can be somewhat effective, but the intractable things that we really want to change, just they seem with us like we're stuck with them for life. Well, the reason we're stuck with that is that most people don't know how to work with that underlying system. So the third part of this model is, what's a practical approach for being able to go to the source code that's giving rise to the behavior and begin to work with it. And that's a whole topic in and of itself, but there's a proven, scientifically based approach to working with that. And that's a big part of our work, big part of my work in the business world is helping people learn and apply that model.
What is there a name for that model?
We just call it the personal development change model. So there are different models that are out there. One of the really well-researched versions are from Harvard professors Bob Keegan and Lisa Leahy, and it's called the immunity to change model. That's the most well-documented, and they've been able to tie it to the process of adult development. So that's the best science I know of a change model.
And Otis works with those psychologists.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a blessing in my life. I actually get to work with these very large Fortune 100 client that we have, and so I'm learning from these folks virtually every day.
You brought another slide. Let's just maybe back up a little bit and get back to a basic. What's the next slide, Caroline? Is compassion is
Yeah, we went
Yeah.
through the definition of
Okay.
compassion.
identifying the pain, the struggle, or the suffering, feeling or reflecting on what it must be like for that person, connecting with desire to alleviate this. Okay, and so that's this 4 steps on the wheel. And what's
Right.
next? What's next, Caroline? Self-compassion is the capacity to show kindness, care, and concern to yourself, particularly when you are under stress or suffering in some way. Okay, so this was just a bit of a review
Yeah.
of what we talked about.
Yeah.
Now, this dynamic graphic, Otis, can you get us through that in about
Sure.
two minutes?
Sure. Here's your speed dating version of that.
All
Okay.
right.
So the first column is we all have something we want to get better at. In business it might be I want to get better at delegating, or for an individual it may be like, you know what, I don't want to get as angry with my spouse. But there's something we want to get better at. That's the first column. That's the green arrow.
Okay.
The next arrow over is in spite of that aspiration that we have, we do a whole host of behaviors that work against that.
Oh, see, the arrow's going the other way.
Yeah, the arrow's going the other way. So it's like we have a foot on the gas, we have a foot on the brake, and the foot on the brake is winning. Well, why is it winning? That brings you to the third column,
Okay.
which is there's certain emotions that are going to come up for you if you stop trying to do those behaviors. If you stop trying to do those counterproductive behaviors, it's going to trigger some negative emotion, because the behaviors that you're doing, even though they're nonsensical, the ones that are the foot on the brake, you're doing them because they make you feel safe. And if you take them away, you're going to experience fear.
This is what my dad did.
Yeah.
And that's
yeah.
our dynamic. That's how we
Yeah.
are.
Boy, if I'm vulnerable, all kinds of bad things are going to happen.
Okay.
So that's the emotion part. And then the fourth column is the thought. And so the thoughts and the emotions run together. It's earlier what we were talking about, the internal operating system, which is in the center of that slide, the iOS. So our thoughts and emotions are giving rise to that counterproductive behavior. So the key point of that slide is if you want to make that green arrow, if you want to actually be able to move forward in your life or your work or whatever it is, you're going to have to take the foot off the brake. And the foot off the brake comes from being able to understand and work with the underlying thoughts and emotions and beginning to recode that.
And those emotions, that shows up in the second quadrant of this.
Yeah.
And then the next one was thoughts. You need to change those thoughts. That sounds like maybe a bit of a change model, addressing those thoughts. How are we going to change that?
Yeah.
All right.
So behind that model is a process of testing, and that's a whole different conversation, but it's not enough to actually see that system. Once you see that system, then you can actually intentionally go through your life and your work running tests of change, where you test the validity of the fears and the thoughts.
Well, I think people have gotten a good introduction to what you do, and some people are going to want to know more. I think the next slide has some ways to engage.
Yes.
What do we have here, Caroline? All right, sign up for...
So you can go and sign up for the newsletter that describes the work Otis and I are doing.
Yeah.
And also we have Wednesday night compassion classes online,
Oh,
free.
okay. Wow.
So people can email me and get an invite and just join us online Wednesdays, 5:30 to 6:30. Yeah.
Thank you. This has
Yeah.
been eye-opening, and I think it's the tip of the iceberg, not even that.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's like drinking from the fire hose, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
the key thing we hope people take from this, Ken, is that if they want to change, they should have hope. That there's a
Yeah.
proven approach to doing this, and the world can seem kind of hopeless at times. There's so much fear in the world and divisiveness, and by increasing compassion, learning to work with our emotions, learning a change model of how we can change our behaviors, and then that fourth part of working together in peer groups, everyone should have hope that they can make the changes that they want in their life.
Well, Sarah and Otis, thank you.
Yeah, thank
Thanks,
you,
Ken,
Ken.
for having us.